Is an Israel-Hamas temporary ceasefire on the cards? Are they nearing a deal to release hostages in exchange for a pause in fighting in Gaza? And if so, what does a temporary ceasefire even look like? We ask these questions because a couple of rather interesting developments have happened over the weekend. Let's break them down for you, beginning with what happened on Saturday. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggesting that a temporary ceasefire could be considered in Gaza, contingent on the return of hostages. Listen in first to this statement.
Many in the world demanded that we not enter the Gaza Strip. We entered. They pressed that we did not enter Gaza City. We entered. They warned us not to enter Shifa, even though Shifa served as a major terror base for Hamas. They pressured us to agree to a full ceasefire. We refused, and I conveyed, we will only agree to a temporary ceasefire and only in exchange for the return of our hostages.
Now, this marks a significant turnaround for Israel. It has gone from vehemently opposing ceasefire calls to now entertaining the possibility. It could be credited to pressure from its closest ally, the US. However, this raises another pressing question. What would this temporary ceasefire look like? And answering this question becomes particularly crucial given the ongoing daily bombardment in the Gaza Strip. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Reports emerged on Sunday claiming that Hamas, Israel and the US have been able to successfully broker a ceasefire deal. It would include a 5-day pause in the fighting to release 50 or more hostages. But the report was vehemently refuted by both Israel and the US. Dismissing the reports of Israel and Hamas agreeing to a temporary ceasefire deal, a White House spokesperson in fact said, and I'm quoting, "No deal yet, but we continue to work hard to get a deal." On Monday, more questions surfaced. Even though both the US and Israel refuted claims of a deal being reached, the Qatari Prime Minister said that Israel and Hamas were close to reaching a hostage release deal. He said that mediation efforts have made good progress in the past few days. The Qatari Prime Minister said this during a joint press conference with European Union's Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell.
The deal is going through ups and downs from time to time throughout the last few weeks, but I think that, I'm now more confident that we are close enough to reach to a deal that can bring the people safely back to their homes, whether they are the hostages on Hamas side or whatever the exchange that will happen will take place from the Israeli side.
The Qatari Prime Minister said only minor differences between Hamas and Israel remained to be resolved, and the challenges facing the deal were just practical and logistical. Qatar and some other countries have been making efforts to mediate between the two sides to secure the release of the hostages being held captive by Hamas. And these regional players are taking efforts to de-escalate the situation and ensure that it does not spiral into a wider war. Last week, the armed wing of Hamas, or the Al-Qassam brigades, said that they were ready to release up to 70 women and children in exchange for a 5-day truce. Additionally, they also demanded the release of more than 200 Palestinian women and children detained by the Israeli side. While Qatari mediators made progress towards a hostage deal, Israeli troops expanded their operation in Gaza. The IDF issued warnings for residents in Jabalia, Gaza's largest refugee camp, and the nearby coastal camp to evacuate. As intense bombardment of Jabalia started, the aftermath, with smoke rising from buildings, was visible on Sunday. According to a Hamas health official, over 80 people lost their lives in Israel's twin strikes on Jabalia. The Saturday bombing also targeted a UN school, sheltering displaced people. Following Al-Shifa Hospital, Jabalia has become a new flashpoint in the conflict, where the Israeli forces are actively pursuing Hamas operatives. The UN rights chief has strongly condemned the strike on the school as horrifying. In his words, the horrendous events of the past 48 hours in Gaza beggar belief. However, this condemnation has not halted the shelling. On Monday, the Palestinian news agency reported that the Indonesian hospital near Jabalia had also come under shelling. Now, let's just take a step back and rewind here. Remember why and when this war started. Israel launched that offensive against Hamas after a wave of brutal cross-border raids on the 7th of October. But 6 weeks into the war, the death toll from Israel's retaliatory strikes has reached over 13, in fact impacted over 13,000 people. Thousands of them are children. Just let that sink in. It's a humanitarian crisis like no other, and Israel is facing intense international pressure to justify its bloody toll. There are concerns that the quote-unquote window of legitimacy for the war to rout Hamas may be closing. Under intense scrutiny, and rightfully so, Israel has presented what it said is evidence against Hamas, one piece of footage revealing a huge tunnel of terror, quote-unquote, purportedly built by Hamas under Gaza's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa. Israel called it more proof of how Hamas uses the patients as human shields. The tunnel, which reportedly drops below 30 feet underground, has been described as an operational tunnel shaft by the Israeli forces. The Israeli military released another video, a CCTV footage reportedly from the 7th of October, showing 2 male hostages from Nepal and Thailand being brought into the hospital. The Israeli army said that they have not yet located both of these hostages. In another clip, an injured man can be seen being wheeled in by armed men as several others wearing blue hospital scrubs look on. At least 240 people, including infants, teens and senior citizens, are being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. The fate of these hostages remains unknown, causing distress not only to their families but also to the Israeli public at large. And as the war claims more lives in the Gaza Strip and puts more in jeopardy, Netanyahu will face numerous questions. Indeed, Israel's window of legitimacy is closing. On to Pakistan now, which by now is used to making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The debt-ridden country is currently surviving only because of loans, and now there seems to be growing clamor in the US calling for a halt in American aid until Islamabad cleans its house. You see, a group of 11 US lawmakers penned a letter to the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and in that letter they have urged the Biden administration to stop aid to Pakistan. Their argument is quite clear. Any future aid should be withheld until Islamabad makes some big changes. These measures, as outlined in the letter, revolve around, number 1, improving its human rights standards, number 2, reversal of the stringent changes made to blasphemy laws, and number 3, conducting free and fair elections. Essentially, the US lawmakers want Pakistan to address these critical issues within its borders before expecting continued financial support. They have called for a restoration of the constitutional order. Not just that, the US lawmakers, which includes Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, have asked the US State Department to prove if any of the US origin security assistance to Pakistan was used to facilitate human rights violations in Pakistan. Pakistan's moves to strengthen the blasphemy law also figured prominently in that letter. The letter warned Antony Blinken essentially that the proposed changes would be used to further tighten the noose around smaller religious groups and minorities in the country. They pointed out that the bill, which is yet to be signed by President Joe Biden, was passed in haste despite repeated calls from many lawmakers for a thorough parliamentary procedure. Now, we all know the country has a poor track record, to say the least, when it comes to upholding human rights of its citizens. In Pakistan, blasphemy is a sensitive issue. Even unproven allegations can incite violence by mobs. According to an independent rights group, the Center for Social Justice, more than 2,000 people in Pakistan have been accused of committing blasphemy since 1987 till May this year. And what's more, at least 88 people have been killed by lynch mobs for similar allegations. The U.S. lawmakers pointed out in their letter how on the 16th of August, 8 days after the bill was passed in Pakistan's parliament, a mob desecrated churches and set fire to homes of Christians in Jaranwala. They also talked about the protests against this bill in Pakistan, including by the Shia community in Gilgit-Baltistan province. The lawmakers warned in their letter, religious persecution remains rampant in Pakistan, and we are concerned about future restrictions on freedom of religion and belief should this bill become a law, quote unquote. In its latest report on Pakistan, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom notes that religious minorities in Pakistan are especially vulnerable to prosecution or violence based on blasphemy allegations. It notes how blasphemy cases have remained a substantial threat to freedom in the country. The U.S. lawmakers stressed on Pakistan's need to address issues like the restrictions on freedom of expression, speech, religion. They expressed concern about enforced disappearances, about military courts, and the harassment and arrest of political opponents, as well as human rights defenders. They mentioned the case of a prominent Pakistani human rights lawyer, Iman Mazari, who was taken from her home at 3 a.m. in August without an arrest warrant. Why? Well, she spoke at a rally against Pakistan's enforced disappearances. And they did not forget the jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan. In their letter, they warned that Khan could potentially face the death penalty for allegedly violating the Official Secrets Act. Here I must mention that the lawmakers made a note of the close ties that Washington and Islamabad share. Hence, the 11 lawmakers had suggestions for the way forward as well. They urged the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad to send observers to hearing as well as other legal proceedings of human rights defenders and political dissidents. They also offered to work with Antony Blinken so that they can promote human rights, democracy, stability in Pakistan. It remains unclear whether the U.S. State Department responded or if it will impact the dynamics of the U.S.-Pakistan ties. Meanwhile, in Washington, the focus on human rights violations has been a high priority, but the U.S. State Department has consistently been careful while commenting on the political turmoil that Pakistan is facing. Earlier this year, the U.S. State Department's annual report on human rights also pointed out the problem with Pakistan. From extrajudicial killings to arrests to enforced disappearances at the hands of government forces, the U.S. government is more than aware of what's going on in Pakistan. If anything, this letter from the 11 lawmakers to the Biden administration is yet another incident in which the mirror has been shown to Pakistan, a reality check for Islamabad, if you will. But will Pakistan listen? And instead of relying so heavily on external aid, will it fix its house? Well, going back its track record, there seems to be no reason here for optimism. Shifting our focus to the UK for now. Is Rishi Sunak's new foreign minister, David Cameron, a Chinese stooge? Is he merely Xi Jinping's pawn? What makes me ask that? Well, for starters, Cameron helped a Chinese firm land $3 billion in investment. Let me just break it all down for you. Cameron was paid by a Chinese company to visit Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Which firm is it? China Communications Construction Company. It was launched by President Xi Jinping. It is funded by the state. So why did it send Cameron to the UAE? What was the former British Prime Minister tasked with? Well, to lure in investors. And for what exactly? for Port City Colombo, a part of China's Belt and Road project in Sri Lanka. David Cameron got involved with the project in January when he visited Sri Lanka. There he met the project's director, Yang Liu. Cameron was seen shaking hands with Liu and posing for photographs. In fact, Cameron also accepted a gift from Liu. And a few months on, Cameron was paid to fly to the UAE. How much exactly? Reports say some $210,000. And as for the project, China had already invested $1.4 billion. It was now on David Cameron's shoulders to bring in more dollars. And Cameron did not disappoint Beijing. He spoke back-to-back at the Ritz-Carlton in Abu Dhabi and the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. He implored delegates from West Asian sovereign wealth funds to pour money into the port. According to a leaked footage, which we could not independently verify, Cameron said he was struck by the immense opportunity of the project. Not just that, he has also endorsed and promoted the project on social media, calling it a sea of opportunity that will help in building bridges and bringing greater prosperity for all. And what was the result of Cameron's lobbying? As I told you, West Asian investors pledged $3 billion, a whopping $3 billion, just off the back of Cameron's visit. That's what the reports say. None of this has been publicly announced. The funding remains subject to legal agreements. Now, there is nothing new about Cameron's enthusiasm as far as China is concerned. When he was the British Prime Minister, he touted a golden era of relations with China. From sharing a pint with the Chinese President Xi Jinping to trying to set up a UK-China investment fund, Cameron has shown disproportionate interest in China. And the love-in seems to be mutual, by the way. When Sunak appointed David Cameron as his foreign secretary, Chinese state media heralded his decision. It claimed Cameron's appointment will breathe new life into the China-UK relationship. Last week, hundreds of Chinese government officials and entrepreneurs paid to meet David Cameron. How much exactly? Close to $10,000. $10,000 for a 3-hour meeting with the former British Prime Minister. Some Chinese businessmen later enthused that it was money well spent. Last year, Cameron was involved in another such China-organized study tour offering VIP access. He also charged almost $15,000 for a picture and dinner in Shanghai. You see, since he left politics, Cameron was not obligated to disclose his business interests in Beijing, but now he is back in the parliament. He is the UK's premier diplomat, and now he cannot afford to have any vested interests in China. The chair of the Labour Party has called for Cameron to disclose all of his financial interests in the country. The new foreign secretary is under the microscope already. Criticism has started mounting with regard to Cameron's support for the Chinese port in Colombo. Lawmakers fear he is pushing for a development that could become a Chinese military outpost in the Indo-Pacific. And speaking of criticism, it's not just Cameron who is facing flack, it's also the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak. He is now facing even more challenges from the heavyweight candidates in his party. Sunak is trying hard to send immigrants back to Rwanda. But his plans were spoiled as the Supreme Court ruled his policy unlawful. It also said there had not been a proper assessment of whether Rwanda was safe. And the Prime Minister then promised to introduce emergency legislation, confirming that Rwanda is a safe country. And for that, Sunak is now considering to block a key human rights law. But the thing is, he does not have some of his own party members' blessings. And this includes the newly appointed Home Secretary, James Cleverly, Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, and the Attorney General, Victoria Prentice. They are opposing Sunak's decision to move away from the European Conventions on Human Rights. You see, there is a split within the Tories at the highest level. Sunak is trying to appease the right-wing members after sacking Suella Braverman. He is trying to become even more radical than her, but it does not seem to be working out for him clearly. The British Prime Minister seems to be flailing around, how will he keep the favor of his